Years later, she found the man who saved her and revealed her true identity. The neon-lit sprawl of Starpoint Station pulsed with life, a chaotic symphony of travelers, traders, and troublemakers moving in the artificial dusk. CIA walked through the crowds with measured steps, her long ears twitching slightly as she tuned in and out of the conversations. Around her, a distant merchant haggled over the price of preserved draconian fruit. A pair of technicians argued in clipped tones about an engine malfunction, and someone somewhere was definitely getting robbed. All in all, just another night in one of the galaxy's busiest waypoints. CIA was used to places like this, transient, restless, full of people who had somewhere to be but never anywhere to stay, and yet she had come here looking for something, someone, a man who had once been a fleeting shadow in her past, a figure that had burned itself into her memory for reasons she didn't fully understand. She had been a child when he saved her, a small thing lost in the chaos of an evacuation gone wrong. She didn't remember much: the acrid scent of smoke, the crushing weight of panic, the blur of people running, and him, a human man carrying her to safety with a kind of reckless certainty that only those with a death wish possessed. She had never seen him again after that day, but that moment had stuck, an unfinished story demanding an ending. After years of searching, she had finally found his name: Elias Grant. Unfortunately, what she had also found was the fact that he had chosen to disappear. Her contact, a grease-stained information broker named Vex, had chuckled when she'd asked about him. Grant, that guy fell off the grid hard. If he doesn't want to be found, you're better off leaving it that way, which of course only made her more determined to track him down. Now standing in the middle of a station, that riot of fuel exhaust and bad decisions, she was closer than ever. The next step, getting to the planet he was supposedly hiding on. Sia's stomach rumbled, but first food. She ducked into a small, dimly lit eyrie crammed between two supply depots. The place had a distinct smell, something fried, something spicy, and something that was probably illegal to consume in at least 4 star systems. The cook, a burly reptilian with a cybernetic arm, barely looked up as she took a seat. You want the special or the safe option? CIA arched a brow. What's the difference? The special won't kill you, the safe option won't make you wish it had. She considered this for a moment. I like a little danger, give me the special. The cook let out a deep, rumbling laugh before slapping something unidentifiable onto a hot metal surface. It sizzled aggressively, as if offended by its own existence. CIA tried not to think too hard about it. As she waited, she pulled up the data on Elias one more time. The details were sparse: former soldier, last recorded location on a backwater planet called Gross 7, a place known for dust storms, rusted out shipyards, and exactly the kind of people who didn't like being found. Her meal arrived, looking only mildly threatening. She took a cautious bite. It was not terrible, which was almost disappointing. Halfway through her meal, she became aware of someone watching her, not unusual in a place like this, but the hairs on the back of her neck prickled nonetheless. She sighed and glanced up. If you're going to try and rob me, at least let me finish eating first. The man standing near her table, a scrapalel-looking individual with a scar down one cheek, grinned. Now, no need to be rude. I was just wondering what brings a fine lady like yourself to this fine establishment. She gave him a flat look. You mean the questionable food? Or the fact that the walls look like they've never been cleaned? The man's grin widened. Both, but mostly I'm curious why an off-worlder is asking around about Elias Grant. CIA's fingers twitched toward the small pulse blade strapped to her thigh. And why do you care? Because the man said people who come looking for Grant don't usually leave with all their limbs attached. CIA sighed. Great. Because finding him wasn't already difficult enough. The man pulled up a chair without asking, settling in like they were old friends. You really don't know what you're walking into, do you? CIA gave him a dry look. If I had a credit for every time someone told me that I could afford a ship that doesn't break down every other cycle. The man chuckled. Fair enough. Name's Rio, and let's just say I've got an interest in keeping certain people alive, Grant being one of them. Why? Because dead men can't pay their debts. CIA leaned back, studying him. So he owes you money? Relwar, let's just say he owes me something. This was quickly turning into more of a mess than she had anticipated. But at least it wasn't boring. So Rillo continued, if you're dead set on finding Grant, I might be able to help. She narrowed her eyes. And what do you Want in return, he grinned, nothing major, just a favor, you look like someone who knows how to handle trouble. She exhaled slowly, that depends what kind of favor. Rillo's grin widened. Oh, nothing too illegal. CIA rubbed her temples. This was going to be a long night. Go 7 was exactly as unpleasant as advertised. CIA had seen her fair share of backwater planets, the kind that felt like the universe had forgotten about them. Halfway through the process of making them habitable, but Gar 7 had a special kind of charm, the kind that smelled like burnt ozone, rusted metal, and just a hint of regret. The shuttle ride down had been rough, made worse by the pilot's complete disregard for the concept of smooth landings the moment the ship touched down. CIA had found herself very personally introduced to the wall. Still breathing back there, the pilot called from the front, not sounding particularly concerned either way. Ka groaned as she peeled herself off the bulkhead. Barely. Did you actually land this thing or just throw it at the planet and hope for the best? The pilot smirked. Little of both. Shaking her head, CIA grabbed her bag and stepped out onto the surface. The sky above was a hazy yellow, the kind of color that suggested the air quality probably wasn't great, but not quite bad enough to kill you outright. The settlement stretched out before her in a mess of squat buildings, dusty streets, and people who all seemed to share the universal expression of "don't talk to me unless you're paying me or running from someone worse." She fit right in. Reload, surprisingly useful, giving her the general location of Elias, Grant's last known residence. Of course, he had also neglected to mention the part where she'd have to bribe her way past 2 different gatekeepers, dodge a pack of territorial junk hounds, and narrowly avoid getting run over by a hover truck whose driver had been far too invested in an argument over the price of recycled ship parts. By the time she reached the address, she was already questioning all of her life choices. The place wasn't much, just a small mechanic shop on the outskirts of town, wedged between a scrapyard and a bar that looked like it had been condemned several decades ago, but was still doing steady business. The sign above the door was barely readable, the paint worn away by time and bad weather. CIA took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The shop smelled like grease and metal, and the sound of someone swearing creatively drifted from beneath a battered old hover bike. Well, she said, crossing her arms, this is already going better than expected. The swearing stopped a moment later. A man rolled out from under the bike, blinking up at her. Ella's Grant. He looked different, older of course, but more than that, there was a weariness in his face, a weight in his eyes that hadn't been there in the fragments of memory she still carried. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and he had the kind of build that suggested he used to be in better shape but had since embraced the fine art of not trying too hard. For a long moment, he just stared at her, then finally, do I owe you money? CIA blinked. What look? I don't remember borrowing anything, but my memory is not what it used to be, so if you're here to collect, at least give me a minute to check my pockets for loose change. See aside, I am not here about money. He squinted at her. Bounty hunter, no debt collector, no angry ex-wife. CIA pinched the bridge of her nose. You don't even know me? He shrugged. Yeah, but I figure one of them's bound to track me down eventually. She exhaled slowly. My name is Ka. I've been looking for you. Illas frowned at that, finally pushing himself up to his feet. That usually means trouble. CIA gave him a dry look. Do you say that to all the people who track you down, or just the ones who don't immediately try to shoot you? Little of both. He wiped his hands on a rag and studied her. All right, who sent you? No one. He gave her a long, skeptical look. Aha, and I'm supposed to believe you just woke up one day and thought, you know what, I should go track down a washed-up mechanic in the middle of nowhere just for fun. Sighed. You saved my life. That got his attention. He frowned, brow furrowing. I what, years ago? A planet under attack. You pulled me out of the wreckage and got me to safety. I was just a child, but I remember. Elias stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. See, across her arms. Ring any bells? He let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. I saved a lot of people back then. Wasn't exactly a one-time thing, I know, she said, but this time I think it matters. Illas watched her for a moment longer, then sighed. Look, I don't know what you're hoping to find, but I'm not that guy anymore. Whatever you think this is, you're better off leaving it alone. Sia's lips quirked. And yet you don't sound convinced. Ella's muttered something under his breath before shaking his head. You want a drink? She blinked. What, I don't Know how to deal with this conversation sober, so I'm getting a drink, you can come or not. CIA considered this, I assume. This is the part where you try to drink me under the table and hope I forget why I came. Ilya shrugged. If it works it. Works, she smirked. Lead the way with a sigh. Ilya's grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. CIA followed, wondering just how deep this particular mess was going to get and why, despite everything, she was already looking forward to it. The bar Ilya's led her to looked exactly like the kind of place where bad decisions were made on a regular basis. The sign flickered unevenly, half the letters burned out, leaving it to read something like the Roa Ting Star. The door creaked ominously as they stepped inside, and the air smelled like cheap alcohol engine grease and a distinct sense of regret. CIA took one look at the dented bar stools, the assortment of questionable patrons, and the bartender who had the expression of a man who had seen too much and cared about none of it, and nodded to herself. Ah yes, she murmured, only the finest establishments for a man of your caliber. Ilya's shot her a side glance. I could have taken you to the nice bar, but I figure you'd rather keep all your credits. CIA smirked. Thoughtful of you. They found a seat at a booth in the back where the lighting was just dim enough to make it harder to tell how many of the stains on the table were recent. The bartender, a broad-shouldered man with a cybernetic eye and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, grunted as he approached. What'll it be? Ilya's gestured at Ka. She's paying. CIA sighed. Of course I am. The bartender barely looked at her. You want something that'll make you regret your choices now, or something that'll make you regret them in the morning? CIA considered. Surprise me. The bartender nodded and walked off without another word. Ilya's leaned back against the booth, watching her. So you spent all this time tracking me down now? What? CIA drummed her fingers against the table. That depends. Do you actually remember saving me, or are you just humoring me? Ilya's exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I remember the planet, the evacuation. A lot of people didn't make it out. His gaze flickered to her ear's eye. Remember pulling a kid out of the wreckage, but I didn't exactly stop to ask questions at the time. CIA nodded. That was me. Ilya's was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what you think I can give you. I was just a guy in the right place at the right time. She tilted her head. You really believe that? He shrugged. Look, I'm not a hero. I did my part, then I walked away. CIA studied him, searching his face for something she couldn't quite name. So why do I get the feeling you're lying? Ilya's let out a short, humorless laugh. Because people like me don't get to be heroes, we just survive. The bartender returned, then setting down 2 glasses of something dark and vaguely menacing. Ilya's took his without question and downed half of it in one go. CIA eyed hers with a bit more skepticism. So Ilya said, voice rough from the drink, what exactly do you want from me? CIA lifted her glass, letting the light catch the liquid inside. Honestly, I don't know. She took a cautious sip and immediately regretted it. Stars that burns. Elias smirked. Told you. She coughed, shaking her head. Anyway, I just know that moment stuck with me, and now that I found you, I want to understand why. Ilya's rolled the glass between his fingers, gazed distant. You ever think maybe you're better off not knowing? CIA arched a brow. Has that approach ever worked for you? His silence was answer enough. She sighed, setting her glass down. Listen, I didn't come all this way just to be brushed off, whether you want to admit it or not. You mattered that day, maybe not to everyone, but to me. Ilya's met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. Then finally he exhaled and said, all right. CIA blinked. All right, he shrugged. You want to dig into the past? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. Ka smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. Ilya's muttered something under his breath and took another drink. Ka leaned back in her seat, already wondering just how deep this was going to go and why, despite everything, she was looking forward to it. The headache arrived before the sunrise. Ilya's cracked one eye open, immediately regretting it as the dim light filtering through the grimy window stabbed into his skull like a vindictive little assassin. He groaned, rolling over, only to realize that rolling over was a mistake. The floor, as it turned out, was much closer than he remembered. There was a muffled laugh from across the room. Ah yes, CIA drawled, truly a picture of grace and dignity. Ilya's groaned again, voice muffled against the wooden planks. Shut up now. Now is that any way to talk to your drinking buddy? CIA was seated in What passed for a chair in this place, looking far too smug for someone who had been just as enthusiastic about last night's terrible decisions. Elias peeled himself off the floor, squinting at her. You look suspiciously alive for someone who matched me drink for drink. Chow stretched lazily the tips of her long ears, twitching alien metabolism, she said smugly, better processing faster. Recovery and let's be honest, better genes overall. Elias narrowed his eyes. I regret saving you already. CIA grinned too late. You're stuck with me now. Elias rubbed his temples, sitting up. His head throbbed like it was trying to escape his skull. All right, remind me, what exactly did we talk about last night? CIA hummed, tapping her chin. Well, let's see, you told me that you were, and I quote, a simple mechanic with absolutely zero dark secrets or mysterious past to speak of. Elias sighed. Fantastic then. You proceeded to get into an argument with a cyborg over the aerodynamic capabilities of old Earth chickens. Elias frowned. That doesn't sound right. Oh, it happened very passionately, I might add. CIA smirked. You were adamant that with the right modifications chickens could become viable scout drones. Elias stared at her. That is absolutely something I would say, which brings us to the part where someone tried to shoot you. Elias groaned. Ah, of course. CIA shrugged on the bright side. They were a terrible shot. Elias stood stretching until his spine made a series of unsettling pops. Great, another person in this hellhole who wants me dead. That's what number? CIA tapped her fingers against the table. From what I gathered, at least 4, but possibly 7 depending on who you owe money to. Elias scrubbed a hand over his face. I hate this planet. You do seem to be making a lot of enemies for someone who claims to just be a mechanic. CIA pointed out. Elias gave her a flat look. Mechanics deal with dangerous people. It comes with the territory cost. Smirked. Sure. And I'm just here for a friendly chat. Elias rolled his eyes. What's your theory then? CIA leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. Oh, I don't know, maybe that you were more than just some pilot caught in a bad situation all those years ago. Maybe that you were part of something bigger, something that made you valuable enough for people to want you dead. Even now, Elias exhaled, tilting his head back. You should have been a detective. CIA grinned. I considered it, but there's far more fun in tracking down old heroes and making them uncomfortable. Elias muttered something under his breath and made his way toward the door. I need food and possibly a very strong cup of something caffeinated before I decide whether or not to listen to you. CIA followed, still looking far too amused. And here I thought we were bonding. They stepped outside into the dusty streets of Go7. The air smelled of metal and ozone, the usual scent of a settlement built more for necessity than comfort. Elias led them toward the market, where stalls were set up with all manner of things: spare ship parts, dubious-looking food, and a variety of weapons, most of which looked like they had been salvaged from battles long past. Elias stopped at a food vendor, ordering something that smelled edible but looked questionable. Chow watched him with open amusement. You sure you want to risk that? She asked. Elias bit into whatever it was chewing thoughtfully. I've survived worse. CIA shook her head. Your funeral. As they ate, Elias kept an eye on the crowd. Something felt off, like an itch at the back of his skull, a feeling he had learned to trust over the years. CIA noticed his shift in demeanor. What is it? Elias's gaze flicked over the market, scanning faces, movements, anything out of place where being watched. Just sighed. Well, that didn't take long. Elias turned to her, voice low. Stay close, and if things go south, don't be a hero. CIA arched a brow. You really think I'm the type to just run? Elias smirked. Number, that's what worries me. Before she could respond, a group of men stepped out from the alleyway ahead, blocking their path. Elias recognized one of them immediately, the same guy who had tried to shoot him the night before. Well, the man sneered. Guess I should have aimed better last night. Elias sighed. You could try again, but I really don't think you do any better in broad daylight. The man scowled. You've got a lot of people looking for you, Grant. Makes me think you're worth something. Elias shook his head. I am absolutely not worth the trouble, trust me. The man smirked. Well, see about that. He signaled to his men, who started reaching for their weapons. Elias tensed, already calculating how to get out of this without getting shot, and then CIA moved faster than a human should have been able to. One moment she was beside him, the next she was behind their would-attackers, disarming the first. Before he could even react, the second man turned, aiming his gun only for Ja. To grab his wrist and twist, making him yelp and drop it, Elias took the opportunity to elbow the third man in the gut, sending him sprawling. The leader cursed, stepping back. What the hell is? Shika smirked, ears twitching. Wouldn't you like to know? The remaining men scrambled to retreat, dragging their fallen with them. Elias turned to Ka, brow raised. That was impressive. CIA shrugged. Alien metabolism, better reflexes. Also, I may have taken some self-defense classes over the years. Elias chuckled. Remind me never to get on your bad side. CIA grinned. Oh, Elias, I thought you already were. Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. I need more coffee. CIA laughed, nudging him forward. Come on, old man, let's get moving before they decide to come back with friends. Elias muttered something about regretting everything, but he followed her anyway. Elias had a rule about trouble: if it followed you home, it was time to find a new home. Unfortunately, Gar 7 wasn't exactly teeming with fresh starts, and the one place Elias called home, his ship, a glorified heap of metal and barely functional wiring, was the only sanctuary he had. CIA, of course, was in a different category of trouble altogether, the kind that didn't just follow you home but made itself comfortable, rearranged your furniture, and casually suggested redecorating. You live here? She asked as they stepped inside the ship's dimly lit interior. Elias tossed his jacket onto a chair. It's more of a temporary arrangement. CIA looked around with an expression of mild horror. The ship was well, it had seen better days. The floor panels were uneven, wires hung exposed from the ceiling, and a faint smell of something burning lingered in the air. Temporary, she repeated, nudging a loose panel with her foot. This place looks like it could fall apart if I sneeze too hard. Elias sighed. She's got character, she's got structural instability. CIA corrected, peering at a wall that had definitely been patched up with duct tape, and hope. Elias waved a hand. Look, I didn't bring you here to critique my interior decorating skills. CIA smirked. Good, because they're non-existent. Elias ignored her, moving toward the cockpit. The old leather seat creaked as he dropped into it, pressing a few buttons on the console. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of GOES 7 and the surrounding systems. We need to leave, he said. CIA folded her arms. Because of those goons from earlier. Elias glanced at her. Because of who sent them? Sia's expression turned serious. You recognize them? Elias exhaled, tapping a section of the map. Not the grunts, but their employer. Yeah, I know him. The display zoomed in on a name: Tarlin VZ. CIA frowned. Never heard of him. Elias gave a humorless chuckle. Lucky you. CIA raised an eyebrow. And you have? Elias leaned back in his chair. He used to run weapons deals in the outer systems, smuggling, black market, trading, all the fun stuff. Then he got ambitious, started digging into other markets: mercenary work, information brokering, and more recently tracking down people who don't want to be found. CIA studied his face. And you think he's after you? Elias gestured vaguely. Hard to say. He's the kind of guy who collects debts even when there's nothing left to collect. Maybe I did something years ago that pissed him off. Maybe I've got something he wants, or maybe he just thinks I do. Tilted her head. What's more likely? Elias hesitated, then muttered option C. Narrowed her eyes. Elias, he sighed. Look, I might have very hypothetically stolen something from him a long time ago. CIA sat down across from him, resting her chin on her hand. Oh, do tell. Elias scrubbed a hand down his face. It was years ago. I was working a salvage job near one of his old routes, came across a shipwreck. Figured it was just abandoned cargo, but turns out it was his abandoned cargo. CIA leaned forward. And what was in the cargo? Elias hesitated. A data core. Sia's ears twitched. Just a data core? Elias gave her a knowing look. You ever known a data core to be just a data core? CIA grinned. Fair point. What was on it? Elias shook his head. Never decrypted it, sold it off to someone else before Vess even knew it was missing. CIA whistled. Let me guess, that didn't go unnoticed. Elias smirked. You could say that. CIA drummed her fingers against the table. And now he's found you again? Elias nodded. Looks that way. CIA exhaled, leaning back. All right, then we have two options. Elias arched a brow. Do we? CIA held up a finger. One, we run, try to get off this rock before Vess's people lock things down. Elias nodded. Solid plan. CIA held up a second finger. Two, we make it his problem. Elias stared at her. I don't like that one. CIA smirked. I love that One Elias sighed, what does making it his problem even mean? Sia's eyes gleamed. We make him think we have something even more valuable, something worth chasing. We turn the game around. Aya shook his head. That sounds incredibly dangerous. CIA grinned. Exactly, and fun. Elias groaned, rubbing his temples. This is why I work alone. CIA propped her feet up on the console, and yet here we are. Elias exhaled, staring at the map. He didn't like this, but Ka wasn't wrong. Running would only delay the inevitable. Vest had resources, and if he thought Elias was worth tracking, he wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. Elias frowned. You're sure about this? CIA smirked. Nope, but that's half the fun. Elias sighed again, leaning back. Remind me why I let you on my ship. CIA grinned. Because deep down you know I make things way more interesting. Elias muttered something under his breath, then turned back to the controls. All right, he said, let's make some trouble. Elias had been in a lot of bad situations before. That was just the nature of his life. Wrong jobs, wrong people, wrong choices, but actively walking into a trap that was a new one. He tapped his fingers against the ship's controls as they neared the coordinates. CIA had dug up a small abandoned mining outpost just outside Gar 7's orbital zone. Quiet, isolated, perfect for the kind of business people like Terran Vest conducted, which made it exactly the kind of place Elias didn't want to be. You're sure about this? He asked, glancing at CIA. She leaned back in the co-pilot's chair, arms crossed, looking infuriatingly relaxed. I mean, if you're having second thoughts, we could always just go back and wait for Vest to send another hit squad. Elias exhaled sharply. Not helpful. Ka grinned. That's not what you keep me around for. He muttered something under his breath and focused back on the landing sequence. The ship's thrusters fired in short, controlled bursts as they lowered into the outpost docking bay. Dust kicked up around them, swirling in the stale artificial gravity. As soon as the engines powered down, the silence pressed in. The station was old, abandoned years ago, when the mining operation dried up. Only the occasional blinking panel or flickering emergency light suggested that someone had recently bothered to reactivate the power. CIA stood stretching. All right, let's go. Crime Lord Elias groaned, standing as well. I hate that sentence. Ka clapped a hand on his shoulder. That's because you lack vision. They stepped off the ship into the station's main loading bay that smelled of rust and neglect, the walls covered in the kind of grime that only decades of abandonment could produce. Remind me, Elias said, why does he think we have something valuable? CIA shrugged. Because we told him we do. Elias shot her a look. Relax, she said. It's all about confidence. We make him think we've got something he desperately needs, and suddenly we're the ones in control. Elias sighed. And if that doesn't work? Ka smirked. Then we improvise. Elias rubbed his temples. I hate improvising. CIA patted his back. That's why I'm here. Before Elias could respond, a voice echoed through the station's main corridor. Didn't think you'd actually show up, Grant. Elias turned. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, 2 armed men flanking a tall, sharp-featured man in a long coat. Terran VZ studied them with cold amusement. And here I thought you were smarter than this. Elias forced a smirk. Disappointed. Vest chuckled. Not at all. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down. His eyes flicked to CIA. And you, I don't believe we've had the pleasure. CIA smiled. Oh, I love when people say that. It makes me feel so mysterious. Vest raised an eyebrow. You're certainly something. Elias sighed. Look, Vest, let's cut the theatrics. You think I have something you want. I think you have something I want specifically to leave here without a dozen bullet holes, so how about we talk like civilized people? Vest smirked. Civilized? You stole from me. Elias allegedly. Elias corrected Vest's expression, darkened. Not allegedly. Fact. You took something valuable from one of my shipments, and now after all this time I finally find you again, so tell me. He took a slow step forward. Where is it? Elias forced himself to stay relaxed. Oh, that thing long gone. Sold it years ago. Vest's eyes narrowed. Then you'll tell me who has it? CIA stepped in before Elias could respond. See, that's the problem, she said, smiling. We don't actually know who has it now, but what we do have. She let the sentence hang. Her expression smug. Vest studied her go on. SIA leaned in slightly. Let's just say Elias might have taken one thing from you back then, but we found something else, something bigger. Vest's gaze sharpened. I don't like games. Neither do I, CIA said smoothly, but you're playing One, whether you like it or not, and if you shoot us now, well, you'll never find out what we know. VZ was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Ella's resisted the urge to look at Ka and say, "What the hell are you doing?" He had no idea where she was going with this, and yet he saw it in Vess's eyes. That flicker of uncertainty. Greedy people were predictable. If they thought there was something more valuable in play, they couldn't ignore it. Finally Vess exhaled, "Fine talk." Ka beamed, "Oh good, I was worried we'd have to shoot our way out of here." Vess smirked. "You still might," Elias muttered, encouraging. CIA ignored him now. "Vess, darling, you're a smart man, so tell me if Elias did take something else from that wreck. Don't you think someone else would want it just as badly as you?" Vess's expression remained unreadable. "And who would that be?" CIA spread her hands. "Now that's the million credit question, isn't it?" Elias saw it happen, the tiny shift in Vess's stance, the slight narrowing of his eyes. He was considering it. That was all they needed. Vess exhaled, "Fine, you have my attention, but if you're lying," CIA grinned, "then we're dead." Yeah, we get it now. How about we move this conversation somewhere with better seating?" Vest gestured for them to follow. "Try not to make me regret this," Elias sighed, shooting CIA a look as they walked. "What exactly is your plan?" CIA smirked. "I have no idea." Elias groaned. "Fantastic." CIA clapped him on the back. "Relax, partner, what's the worst that could happen?" Elias muttered. "You really need to stop saying things like that." As they followed Vess deeper into the outpost, Elias had the sinking feeling that whatever came next, it was going to be very interesting. Elias had always considered himself a survivor. He could talk his way out of trouble, run when talking failed, and shoot when running wasn't an option. But as he stood in the dimly lit control room of the abandoned outpost, staring at Tarlin VZ across a flickering hollow table, he had the unsettling realization that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. Worse, he wasn't sure Saya was. "Either you two are either the smartest people in the system," Vest said, studying them with a half smirk, "or the dumbest." CIA grinned. "Why not both?" Elias resisted the urge to groan. Vest leaned forward. "Let's assume for a moment that I believe you, that Elias didn't just steal one thing from me all those years ago, but something even bigger, something important that still leaves a question." Elias folded his arms, which is Vess's smirk faded. "Why are you still alive?" Elias frowned. "I'd like to think it's my natural charm." CIA nodded. "Oh, absolutely. That and your impeccable hygiene." Elias gave her a sideways glance. "You're not helping." VZ drummed his fingers on the table. "If you had something of real value, someone else would have come for it by now, someone bigger than me, but no one has, which means one of two things: either you're lying, not lying," CIA interrupted, "or you have no idea what it is you actually have." Vest finished. That gave Elias pause, because honestly that second option wasn't wrong. CIA, however, didn't miss a beat. "What's the difference?" she asked. "Either way, it means you need us just as much as we need you." Vess exhaled sharply, considering. Elias decided it was time to push their luck. "Look, Vess, you want the truth. I don't know what was in that wreck. I don't know what was in the data core I sold, but what I do know," he gestured towards Ka, "she spent years tracking it down, and if she wants it, it means someone else will too." "Someone big?" Vess glanced at Ka, eyes narrowing. "And who exactly are you?" CIA smirked. "Just a girl on a mission." Elias sighed. "A very persistent mission." Vess was quiet for a long moment, then chuckled. "I'll admit I like your style, but here's the thing: you might have tricked me into listening, but that's not the same as trusting you." Ella shrugged. "We don't need trust, we need an opportunity." Vest gave him a long look, then finally exhaled. "Fine, here's my counter offer: you leave here alive, but you owe me." Alias tensed. "Oh, you, what exactly?" Vess's smirk returned a favor. "Something of my choosing. Could be tomorrow, could be a year from now, but when I call you, answer." Elias exchanged a look with Ka. CIA tilted her head. "Do we get to ask what kind of favor?" Vest smiled. "You can ask, but I won't answer." Elias sighed. "Fantastic." CIA leaned in, her voice casual. "And what happens if we say no?" Vess's expression darkened. "Then we find out how many people I can pay to make your lives very, very inconvenient." CIA tapped a finger against her chin. "Well, when you put it like that," Elias groaned. "Fine, we take the deal." Vess extended a hand. Elias hesitated, then shook it. "Smart choice," Vess said, releasing his grip. "Now get off my station before I change my mind." CIA gave an exaggerated salute. "Pleasure doing Business. As they walked back toward the ship, Elias muttered, "That was not business, that was extortion." CIA grinned. Potato toe, Elias sighed. "You do realize this means we'll probably have to deal with Vest again, right?" CIA shrugged. "Hey, future problem." Elias shook his head, but as the ship powered up and they lifted off, he couldn't help but feel lighter because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't just running. Ka turned to him as the stars stretched into the endless black. "So, partner, where to next?" Elias smirked. "Anywhere." The end.